Hello again and welcome to N=21, and what I'm going to try and do today is slightly different. So what I'm going to try and do today is actually talk through a pre-made example, and this is about internationalization, so about localization of text in particular. There are other things about internationalization, you know, all that sort of stuff about periods versus commas, all that stuff about centigrade versus Fahrenheit, all that stuff about different images that you need to put in there, and also things about right to left text. All of that I'm not touching today. All I'm touching really today is localization of text. For other stuff, that's outside of the scope of what I look at the moment. But obviously there is stuff to look at there, and you'll need to consider that if you want to make your app truly international. So just starting on localization of text, there are three ways really to go about internationalization. And internationalization is 18 characters long, which is why we've got i18n. Or is it 20 with the I in it? Anyway, that's why it's called i18n, internationalization. And there are three ways to go about it in MvvmCross. The first way is to really look at using resx files. So these are XML files that get compiled into DLLs, and it is the Microsoft official way of doing local text and resources, and it's also the way that kind of Xamarin have followed. There's a really good tool out there that RDO produced called Vernacular, which is available open source and free on GitHub. And then you need to look at how to do that and how to use it. There is one link I'll give you at the end of this talk, which is from a guy called Stefan Opendix, and he's integrated these resx files into MvvmCross, and I'll give you that. But that's the official kind of way of using localization of text, and I'm not going to talk about that today because there's already heaps of resources out there about how to do resx files. The second way is to use the MvvmCross way, which is all about JSON files, and I'll talk about that mainly in this talk. And then the third way is you can actually take a look at 1 and 2 and you can build your own, yeah? Particularly for apps which are quite small and quite compact, consider how you can do your own localization. Perhaps using the framework that I've put in place, perhaps using resx files, perhaps using a combination of the two, or just using your own systems. So those are the three ways of going, and I'm mainly here going to talk about two, using the MvvmCross way and JSON. So the MvvmCross way uses a couple of plugins, particularly JSON localization, but behind the scenes that uses something called the Resource Loader plugin. And what it does is it mainly links the text that you want to display on the screen to the view model. And that's good because you are already sharing view models across platforms. So here you're looking to share the text, the kind of static labels, etc. in those view models, and the titles and things like that across your view models as well. So let's switch over to our sample, and our sample is pre-made here. And the sample we're going to look at is called Babel, and it'll be in the N=21 folder in the N+1 repository. And it's a standard app, as you can see. It's been built using NuGet, and the packages we pulled into this, just to show you that, we've got obviously the standard packages, which are kind of MvvmCross and the hot tuner and the portable support and the starter pack. But in addition to that, we pulled in JSON, and JSON uses Newtonsoft JSON under the covers. And then we pulled in JSON localization, and JSON localization pulls in the resource loader as well. So the resource loader is just there to enable you to load resources, so that's asset files in Android and its content files in iOS and Windows. And the JSON localization has some helper classes to let you work out how to use them. So if we look at this app at the moment, then in app itself, as well as the standard text that you always kind of see, so you're very used to seeing this block, which is all about lazy loading services, and you're very used to seeing that block, which is that line, which is about how to register your app start. We've added one thing, and that's called initialize text, and that's this simple method here that says, given that I'm a text provider builder, here you go, then register these two singletons. So you create a text provider builder and you register those two singletons. And what's the text provider builder look like? Well, it's this class here in services, and you can see what it is it's got a simple constructor that passes down two strings to its base class, and those strings are just about how to look up things really. So there's something called namespace, which is kind of just used as a general lookup first level key. Then there's the root folder for the resources, so that's the actual path within your application where the resources are going to lie. And you can see these constants here are defined in this folder.
So we're saying that our general namespace is just going to be called Babel. It's nothing to do with C# namespaces. You can use whatever you want here. It's just to do a lookup mechanism. So you can have as many of these resource namespaces as you want in your application, but we just use one in pretty much all the applications I look at. Perhaps if you had separate components, you'd use separate namespaces for each one, but here I just use one general namespace. And then the root folder for resources is just going to be the way that you look things up. So just jumping a little bit ahead, so you can see our root folder is called babelresources.text. If you look in the Droid project, for example, then you'll find the assets folder, and in there you'll find babelresources/text. So that's how that corresponds. And in iOS and Windows Phone, you'll actually find babelresources/text. Here it is at the root of BabelTouch and at the root of Phone. So that's all that corresponds to, that string. So coming back to the core project, you can see we then back into Text Provider Builder. We've also got this override, and this override is telling us which resource files you want to load. So these resource files will get loaded for every single language you choose. And all we do at the moment is we've just got some simple reflection that says, please find me all of my view models and use those as a set of files. So you don't have to use reflection here. You could instead, if you want to, create a dictionary like var_ict, var my_dict equals new dictionary, and you could pass in anything you'd like in here in terms of the files to load. So you could pass in, that I would like to load first view model, and that I'll find the first view model's JSON content in a file called, first view, for example. Yeah. By default, this is the kind of way. Oops, managed to delete too much. This is the kind of pattern that I actually expect. I actually expect to see that the first view model strings will be located in a file called first view model. But you can do anything you want here. So if you want to change the naming conventions, you can do that. This is just the default way of doing it at the moment. Is to use a dictionary of view model names. So let's just take a look at our view models, and we've got a first view model here. You can see it's got some commands in it which will enable us to change language, so we'll come back to those. We've got a second view model which doesn't have anything in it at the moment. It's just going to have static text. And both of these we've inherited this time from a base view model. So hopefully you can see there's a base view model. And the base view model just itself inherits from MVX view model. And all it provides at the moment is a text source, this base view model. And what the text source does is it returns, and let me just see if I can reformat this a bit for you. Here it returns a language binder, and the language binder is going to be keyed on that general namespace and that name. Now if you want to provide more than one language provider, you can. So you could have an IVMX language binder here, which is for shared text, for example. Or maybe there'd be an error text source. And for that, you would simply, instead of returning this this object that's returned that's keyed on general namespace and the type name, here you might, for example, key it on the general namespace and error. And what that would mean is that you'd need to look up in a file called error. So back in that text provider builder here, you'd better make sure that you provided that key of error, and that will be in the error file. And that way that it will know to look inside a file called errorfile.json for these errors. We're not doing that at the moment. We're just going to stick with just text that's inside our base view model. So inside our view models class, so there'll be a file for first view model and a file for second view model. And that's it. That's all we've got in there. I'll just show you briefly what we do to change language here. And what we do here is we've got a lolcat command which calls through to a method called pickLanguage. So you can see that. And what pickLanguage does is it looks for the builder, which is a injected property of our type IVMX text provider builder, and that asks it to load resources. Now typically in your apps, or typically in the apps that I certainly build, you never change language. All you do is you select language at the start, normally just by looking at the phone and saying, well, this phone is set up for French, therefore I will use French forever. Yeah. So we don't use as dynamic a binding system normally for language. Instead, what we use is a one-time binding system, and normally you wouldn't expect to have a page where you pick these languages. Because of that, you will find, and we'll show you in some of the demos, that if you change language dynamically within the app, not everything updates. And the reason for that is we've just optimized it so that you're not constantly listening for changes in language. Instead of that, we are saying, well, we don't expect anyone to change language. If you start French, you're probably going to continue with French. And so we don't update dynamically like that. If you do need, if you're in a particular country which is bilingual, or a particular user which is bilingual and wants to change between languages dynamically, you're probably going to need to customize this default behavior. But for the majority of apps, I think this static behavior works very well. So that's the core project, and I have talked through it quite quickly, so let me just go again. So basically the core project is a standard portable library, but we've added references to a couple of packages which are used. One of them is the JSON package, and the other one is this JSON localization. And the JSON localization itself has pulled in the resource loader. So that's all we've done to actually create this core package. And then what we've done is just in App Start, we've added some special initialization, and that special initialization provides this kind of text provider builder which provides this resource file lookup mechanism. And that's what we've done. And then in our view models, we've just in every single view model using inheritance, we provided the text source, and that text source just kind of has this language binder provided, and that language provider exposes a general namespace and the type of the view model, and that's all it is. And the lookup mechanism here says that if you're in the first view model, then we will look in general first view model in order to find that actual language file that we need. So let's just take a look at some of the UI projects that come with this. The first one of these is, let's just start with Droid, seeing as it's first in the alphabet there. And what you'll see in Droid is it's a normal project again, but again, because we want to pull in these other packages we have, so we've pulled in JSON, and we've pulled in JSON localization, and JSON localization has pulled in resource loader. And in order to use that, what we've then pulled in after that is we've got, what we've then done after that is we've set up these folders, and inside these folders we've put some files. And actually these files are all linked files. You can see there's a very small icon there. And the reason they're linked files is because we want to share these files across projects. Yeah, so they are stored in a common location and just shared across every single project. And inside each of these, what you'll find is that there is a normal JSON type format. So it's a curly braced object with a value, with a key and a value. And each of these within each language looks kind of the same. So here's our page title for the second view model. Here's our body 1 for the second view model. And at the root as well. So we've got a lolcat language, we've got a proper English language, and we've got the default language. And these things, will be will supersede each other. So you'll always load the default like this one, and then you'll load whichever language you want to use as specialization on top of it. And so you can see here that what we've got is we've got our default English, as it were, English US or English UK to do that, and then we've got a proper English and a lolcat language that we can load on top. So that's it. Each of these files, as you can see, is marked as an Android asset, and that's really important that they're marked as Android assets, because that way they get packaged and deployed with the project as an asset, which can then be loaded by that resource loader plugin. So that's the assets load, that's the assets explained. And then our views and our setup and everything else just looks like a normal setup, except there is one thing added at the moment that will hopefully not be needed soon, which is that we have added a way of getting hold of a special converter, so a value converter. If you remember back to, I think it was n=4, we had a converter, and this MVX language converter will be exposed with name language in all of our XML resources, so you can use value conversion on it. So let's just take a look at our views, and you can see here we're a bit naughty. We've got two views in one file, so I'll separate those two out just to put them in separates. And you can see what we've got here is we've got a standard view for second view and a standard view for first view, and everything is going to be inside the resources. So let's take a look at the resources, and in particular let's look at second view. And second view looks like this. And what you'll see is that what we've got is, instead, normally you'd expect to see local colon mvx bind equals, and then you'd expect to see, you know, the text bound to the foo property or whatever. And we don't have that here. Instead, what we've got is we've got local mvxlang. And this is actually just an abbreviation, mvxlang. What you're actually writing when you're writing local mvxlang is you're writing the equivalent of, let's see if I can do this, text source, comma, converter equals language, and then converter parameter equals body2, and then just for good measure it also is mode equals two-way. Mode equals one time, which means it only ever gets called once. You don't keep, you know, refreshing because you don't expect the language to change. So that second line there, you can see the mvxlang is equivalent to doing this top one, but I hope you can see it's a lot quicker to do mvxlang than it is to do this. And so that's all we put in there for now. That's the way we put these things together. So you can see in this file we've got a text view that's text body 1, we've got a text view that's text body 2, and at the top here we've got a text view that's text page title. So if I run this up, then hopefully we can show you what it does. So debug start new. And this should run up in my emulator, I hope, which has currently got some interesting random Twitter search display on it. Hopefully it will run. Go to home and see if it starts. Okay, so it's still packaging application and synchronizing assemblies, and hopefully deploy succeeded. So here comes Babel. So the UI for Babel at the moment, and we'll just show you, is basically there's a control at the top that says view second page. So this second page is what we've just seen here, and you can see we've got the page title, we've got the body 1, and we've got the body 2. And you can see those are bound by default to what was in the root of our bootstrap Babel resources, sorry, our assets Babel resources text. So they're bound at the moment to this text here. And if you want instead to make it to load something else, then back in the first view model there's a lolcat button, and that lolcat button binds through, just to show you in that core, that binds through to the lolcat command, and that binds through to pick language and just says please load my language for lolcat. And so what that'll do is it will bind to this guy, it'll tell the UI to load this file, and so we'll be loading up this lolcat language. And so now if we hit view second page, we should see, you know, that language which is in the JSON file. And similarly we can do it for proper English. So we click proper English, we go to the second page, and you can see, you know, now we have this proper English file loaded. So hopefully you can see how that all binds together. And if you need to go back to the default, then you can just pass in an empty string, and that tells it to load the default. And now we're back to the default language. So you can see how the language strings have been loaded, and you can see how they are bound, if you like, into the resources. So you can see those in that AXML there. So that's pretty straightforward to do, but there's one more little thing that we've done in this example, which is that we've also put in the first view, as well as those buttons that you can see at the top, which kind of don't have language bound strings. Also at the bottom here we do have a text view, this one, which is bound to example text on the first view model. So that's this guy here. And what you'll have noticed, or maybe not have noticed, is that back here, that example text is this down here, the page 1 text. And you can see that as we hit lolcat and proper English and default language, it doesn't change. However, if you hit lolcat and then hit full page display, then again it doesn't change. So you can never actually update this because there's no, even though it's bound to this example text, you can never update it because there's that one-time binding that goes on there. So if you do ever need to bind dynamically to languages and change existing pages, you're going to have to find some other way of doing it, because you can't do it here just by doing this. You can only do it so that, you know, your very first page in your app, for example, chooses your language, or you load your language using, you know, the culture information directly within your within the operating system. Yeah, there's nothing you can do about existing language bindings if you go this route. If you did want to have this bound, then you could do it yourself if you really wanted. So let me just show you that. You could, for example, have done local mvx bind equals, and this is quite disgusting as a format, text, and then we're going to bind that to the text source, and we're going to bind that again using the converter equals language, and the converter parameter equals example text, and then mode for this will actually just use one way rather than one time. And then what we should see if we do that is that after we run this up, debug start new, then we can actually force it to refresh. Let's just see if that's the case. So now if we choose lolcat and then we choose force page, then you can see that text there has changed. And if we choose proper English, we choose force page redress, you can see it's changed. But by default as an optimization, we don't support that. Yeah. So if you do need to add it, you need to work out a way to add it. But by default, we're just using one time, and we also use the much shorter format, that local thing, and that's, you know, the default behavior you're going to get. As I say, for most applications that won't matter, but perhaps it will for yours, so there we go. So that's Droid, and that's how that binds. We've got exactly the same UI set up in Windows Phone. So let's just take a look at this. And Windows Phone, again, if we look at packages, you'll see that we've pulled in the same things. For some reason we pulled in file. I'm not sure why we did that. I don't think we needed it. But we have pulled in JSON. We have pulled in JSON localization, and JSON localization's pulled in resource loader. And then, you know, that's the same setup. There's nothing unusual in setup. In this one, we don't have to use the language converter either, because we're going to pull that in natively. So what we've got is we've got our Babel resources, and each of these is the same files. And in fact, we've just got problems with them. Visual Studio jumping across. So let me just see if I can do it. So if we right click on these and do properties, then you should see that what they're linked in is content, do not copy. And we've got exactly the same files, and they are exactly the same. They're linked to the other ones. And they are, you know, just linked in as content, do not copy in each case. Then for value conversion, we do have to do this native language converter trick, which is just using MVX native value converter. And we talked about that in the value converter earlier samples, so I'm not going to worry too much about that. And then language itself is exposed here in app.xaml. And it is quite ugly and verbose, but it's XAML, so that's the way it works. And you've got your language converter in your application resources. And then when you come to your views, like for example second view, and what you can see in here, I hope, just switch these around, what I hope you can see in here is the page title, for example, is bound, and this isn't, you know, this is the full syntax, not a shortcut here at the moment. So it's bound to text source. Our converter is a static resource of language, and our converter parameter is page title. We put a fallback value. We didn't put a mode equals one way. We can if you want. You can put a mode equals one time, or you can leave it as one way, which would be the default. And you can see that's the way that we've declared those languages. And it does get a bit verbose, so here's body 1 and body 2 as well. And that's just the way that we set up these bindings. Yeah, I hope that's not too tricky or anything. But you can see that's the way it is. And the fallback value here just makes it really nice when you actually come to the designer, because you can see, I hope, if I can drag this back, that you get that fallback value in the designer. So you've got something to design around and to move your XML and set your margins and that sort of thing around. So if we run Babel.phone up, hopefully you'll see the same sort of behavior, because it's the same app. So this runs up in the emulator, and we should, so we've got a choose language page. If we view the second page without choosing anything, then we get this default text. So you can see that is the default text from this second view model, and it's here. Yeah. If we then decide to go back and choose lolcat, then when we view the second page, we should get the lolcat speak, and that's from this folder here. Oops, sorry, wrong file. It's from the second view model. And if we go back and we switch to proper English, then we should, when we go to our second page, see that. And again, if you want to go back to default, then you just pass in an empty string and you'll get back to the default. So that's the way the language binding works. And again, you'll notice here at the bottom we've got this kind of text that's on the first page that's bound. And you can see that as we change, it's not changing. And you can, however, in this example, force the page refresh. So you can change to proper English and you can do that. And that's just because in this default example at the moment, we haven't included here in first view, just open it, we haven't included in first view, we haven't included a mode equals one time. I think it's probably better if you do want to use this to use mode equals one time, but it is entirely up to you as well. Mode equals one time just means that there is less listening. So there are less events flying around your system and less responses to events. So it's just a bit lighter to do that. So if I do that, then I think I should have the same behavior when I load this up. And it doesn't matter what I do, I won't be able to refresh that example text. Let me just see. So switch to lolcat, force page, yeah. So now there's nothing being refreshed even though things have changed. Yeah, so it's up to you whether you use mode equals one time or not in Babel phone. By default I don't. When I need to internationalize, I just load it on startup and then I don't worry about it afterwards. Okay, so that's Windows Phone, and then our last sample to look at here is Babel.touch. And Babel.touch has been created in exactly the same standard way, so I'm not going to go through it in detail here, but we've pulled in the same sort of packages. And again, I've pulled in file, and I'm not sure why I pulled it in here, but not the other. I don't think it's needed for this sample. But I pulled in JSON, which definitely is needed, and I've pulled in JSON localization, and that pulled in resource loader. And the resources here are loaded in the root folder, and you can see again, hopefully you can see the little file linking symbol, so you can see it's the same files. So if I do change the text in one of my UI projects, it changes across everything. And if I look at these files, they're exactly what you've already seen. There's nothing surprising in there. There's nothing in setup other than this language converter pulled in again. And I'm sorry that that's needed at the moment. I don't think it should be, but we've got kind of a small bug somewhere that I need to fix. I think it is logged in issues that it shouldn't be there. And then what we do, is these are the standard first views and second views. Hang on, I'm in the wrong project. These are the standard first views and second views, so they're exactly what you normally expect from a project, except that instead of binding using a binding set, so you're quite used to seeing at the moment set equals this dot create binding set, and you bind it from the second view to the second view model, and then you apply that set. Instead of that, what I've got is I've got some shortcuts called BindLanguage, so hopefully you can see those okay. And those BindLanguage is saying for the label, please bind its text property to the language field page title, and that is of course just shorthand for var set equals this dot create binding set. And so this is from a second view to a second view model. We'll do those, and then that's the same as set dot bind, and we're going to bind the label, and we're going to bind its for its L to its L.text, and then we're going to bind that to, and so this would be for the view model's text source, and that's with conversion, and the conversion is for the language converter, so we call it a language, and the parameter we're going to pass in this case is page title. And obviously what we'd probably like to do is we'd like to make it one time, so we'll do that. And that's what that is equivalent to. So let me just show you. See, I think by default it probably isn't one time here, it's probably just one way, but it should be one time, so there you go. So that there, set.apply, is the same as doing this line here. So you can see all we've done is we've provided a shorter. Did I manage to lose my line there? Yeah, so this line here is equivalent to all of these lines here. So it's just a shorter way of doing it, and I hope at some point to provide kind of an expression-based way of doing L.text here as well, because that'd be much easier to use. So we'll put this back into its normal format, and hopefully you can see it there. And the integer indexes here are just about layout, so it's just a way of doing it. And when we run this up, and so to do this I'll need to use type VNC so I can see across to my Mac. Connect. I'll need a password. And hopefully that'll allow me connect into my Mac. Hopefully my Mac's awake. And I need to log in again. Password again. And so when I'm into my Mac, I should now be able to run this guy up. And if I'm lucky, it'll detect it. If not, I'll add it manually. Right, so it's added it, so connect in. And you know, it's going to be the same type of experience that we're going to get in this guy. Oh, no valid device, so we're almost there. iPhone Retina. So it's going to be the same type of thing, and you can see hopefully how we're sharing these text values across these projects. Hopefully it's going to run. Come on, Babel. See, it's there already deployed. It's just looking to sync up. So here we have the same type of UI as we're used to. If we go to the second page, and you can see that's the default text. If we go back and we chose lolcat, and then go to the second page, you can see we get the lolcat text. If we go back and we choose proper English, then the second page, you can see we get proper English coming through. And we can go back to the default, and you can see on the second page we get that. And again, what we've done here is we've included this at the bottom, this page 1 text as example text. And if we go to lolcat and force refresh, you can see it does update. So this is using one way, not one time binding by default. And you know, perhaps that'll change in the future, so don't rely on it. But you can see that, you know, it doesn't refresh just when you just change these buttons. So you do have to do something if you want to update that. And again, my default advice to you is, you know, you shouldn't really, for 99% of apps, you shouldn't really be changing the language as you go along. So we should really try and encourage you to use one-time binding and not really ever update these things. Okay, so that's the Mac project done, the iPod, iPhone and iPad project done. And hopefully you can see that, you know, it's a standard project again. So that kind of ends the demo, and it's more of a demo than it is a tutorial for this one. And if you've got feedback on whether you prefer it done this way or you prefer it done the building it from scratch, then let me know. But the core things to remember are there are some plugins to add in, and then once you've added in the plugins, you do have to make sure that you provide this text provider builder. The text provider builder provides this kind of dictionary lookup of files, and it's from, you know, your view models to your files is the default way of doing it. And then what you do in your view models is you provide a property called text source, and that property is of type IMVX language binder, and that language binder uses lookup keys to tell you where to look in the text provider builder. Yeah, so maybe I rushed out a little bit. Maybe I should do one little demo. Shall I do something? Let me maybe at the end I'll come back and I'll do another demo. You could easily, as I said, add another text source in here, and I think I showed a bit of that earlier. Okay, so back to slideware. And so, you know, hopefully you've seen how we can internationalize text, and when you need to do it, you'll know where to look to see kind of our way of doing it at the moment. As I said, there's some setup provided. You need to provide that text provider builder. You need to provide the text sources, and in your setup in your app, you do generally have to provide a value converter at the moment, but that hopefully is going. The JSON, as you saw, you know, we kind of provide hierarchies, and you can do this as well if you do have an English folder, and then within it you want English UK and English US and English Australian and English wherever else, then you can do that within a hierarchy. And what will happen is you'll always have the default root loaded, and then if you load a language on top, like for example lolcat, and you only provide certain fields, then you'll always have all of the fields from default root and just the overrides from the child one. So you can build them up that way as well. But hopefully you can see how, you know, straightforward it is to use JSON and how compact it is. You can see how we use folders for languages at the moment by default, and you can see the types of content we used. I don't know if I showed it for touch, maybe I should go back and show it, but within this Babel resources, the file type we've used at all occasions. I'm getting some jumping around from Visual Studio, but the file types we've used again within the project is content and do not copy. So that's the file type, the build actions. There is also, and there's an open issue on this which has got some code attached to it. There's another way you could do this, which is you could actually put these files, instead of using Android asset and content, you could use embedded resources within the core PCL, and then you just need to provide a different way of loading them, and I hope that happens in the future. Right now it's not supported by the kind of standard off-the-shelf plugins, but you could do that, and then you wouldn't have to worry about this file linking. You know, I'm not a big fan of file linking, but you wouldn't need to worry about it. There's another way of doing this. Beyond that, you know, the binding format, as we saw, it's quite verbose for Windows. You have to provide kind of the full thing, and perhaps here you should also provide the mode equals 1 time. Yeah, the bindings in Droid you saw were much more succinct, but you can use the longer format if you want to. There's an mvxlang shortcut for that, and that always binds to text source. So if you don't want to bind to text source, if you want to bind to something else, then you have to change the format slightly, but for now you can just do that. And for touch, you know, that was the way we bound, just to text and page title using language. The sample, well, we've seen it. There's a Babel one that's also going to be an N+1 soon. There's also one sample which is the Serious Conference sample, and that has a simple set of files, so you can follow through how that works as well. If you don't like this way, if you want to look at the other ways that I introduced in the first slide, then definitely check out Vernacular from RDO. It's really well used now. It's pretty well supported within Xamarin and within Windows, so go for it, go and take a look at it. It's a really good project. And perhaps coupled with that, also look at using resx files, which is this blog post from appendix.blogspot.ch, so it's from Stefan. Take a look at that, and maybe that's the way you might want to go. So take a look at those if you want to go different directions. As I say, there are some open GitHub requests, some issues logged with MvvmCross for internationalisation, and it may be that we look at doing other things in the future. So for example, one request we have is to use CSV files. So there's a request to just use a table, and that would be really easy to edit your text, so I quite like that suggestion. Another request is to use these embedded resources, so I quite like that suggestion, because then you don't have to worry about file linking, and perhaps you lose one, and perhaps you get the content type wrong and all of that. And then, you know, there's room for more suggestions, so by all means pile in, and hopefully we can just support those through different plugins. So I'm going to end it there. I hope it kind of made sense to you going this way. By all means, feedback, suggestions on whether you hated this format of N+1 or whether you liked it more, or whether you want a mixture of the two. But I'll upload the code, I'll upload the video, and by all means give me feedback on what you loved and hated on it. So I hope you could see, you know, our suggestions there. That's the end of the N=21 on language, and we'll see what we do next. Cool, thank you very much.